My name is Amy Fothergill. I am a gluten-free chef and baker, and today I'm going to be talking to you about gluten-free flours, the ones that I use, the ones that I've made in the past, and like the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that. So thank you for coming. And I said to a few people, if you could please stay muted. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. I do have an assistant who's willing and able to help with that. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to give you a very brief overview of my story. And if you know me, and I'm going to do this in under 2 minutes, you're going to be very impressed. I'm going to talk about the basics of gluten-free flours and binders. I'm going to give you the instructions on how to make a do-it-yourself flour mix that I used to use back in the day. I'm going to talk about some other flours that are gluten-free flours that you can use. I'm going to talk about the other flour blends that are on marketplace. So if you don't want to make your own, what is out there, what I like and what I didn't like, and I did a bunch of testing, and I'll share that with you. I'm going to talk about the flour blend that I use now in my bakery, and I've been using for about the past 3 years, and it's made incredible, it's almost 4 years, a big difference in the quality of the products. And I have a couple of little things to show you some photos, a little video, and then we'll wrap it up. So he's also going to tell me if when we get to 30 minutes, so then 45 minutes, so hopefully I don't go on now. Okay, so next slide, please. So here is my story. I started off, I really started cooking with my mom, and she encouraged me to go to culinary school. So I went to the Cornell Hotel School, and I focused on culinary. After that, I worked in restaurants, catering, contract food service. And during that time at the contract food service, I was part of an implementation of an accounting software, because people always ask, how did you go from food to Oracle? So I started working for Oracle in a software company. I was an instructor, a writer, and a sales consultant. So I did a lot of this, but I wasn't selling things that are nearly as exciting to me now as the gluten-free products and so forth. Shortly after that all started, or I should say shortly after, I guess, we got married, we started a family, and I decided to stay at home with my children, but I couldn't really sit still. So I think my third business was the family chef, and I started teaching classes and trying to help other moms learn about cooking. And when that happened, about a year after it started, well, when my daughter was born, we realized she had a gluten intolerance, and I just had no idea what to do, but I was a chef and I've been cooking my whole life, so I just figured it out. So later, after having a blog and teaching classes, I wrote the Warm Kitchen Cookbook, which a lot of people tell me they still use today, and it's very nice and very inspiring for me. And then after doing that for a while, I started a cottage food bakery, and I now sell locally to the Bay Area, mostly on the coast side here. And there, everything's gluten-free, and I'll tell you why it's made, the flour blend that I'm using now makes such a difference. And again, a lot of people who buy what I make, they'll say to me they can't even tell it's gluten-free. And I think that's just the biggest compliment. So I always say it's always delicious and always gluten-free. And then a little later on, I'm going to talk to you about what I'm doing next, but we'll save that for the end. Okay, next slide. All right, so let's talk about the basics of flour blends. And I will be very honest with you. I do not believe there is a one-to-one, because if you're trying to replicate flour as with regular gluten flour, there are different types. There's bread flour, there's pastry flour, there's all-purpose, there's flour that is used for pizza and pasta. So there really, to me, is not one flour that does that all, but there are good flours out there that can replicate some of those things. And again, I'm going to tell you all about that at the end. So in general, you want to use what I call 2-to-1 ratio. And a 2-to-1 ratio is 2 parts of a grain to 1 part of a starch. And I found in general, that is a really good balance. I don't know for sure all these flours are out there if that's what they use, but I know that when I started, that was working for me. You want to make sure that every flour that you use is gluten-free, because sometimes some flours may be produced and manufactured in factories that are not all gluten-free. So always check for that. And common grains are, for the grain part, are any of the rice flours, sorghum, millet, quinoa, buckwheat, which sounds funny because it has wheat in the title, but it is gluten-free, teff, and garbanzo, or any of the bean flours. Common starches are tapioca starch or flour, sometimes it's called both, potato starch, cornstarch, potato flour. Now, the big difference between potato flour and potato starch is it's the flour of the potato, and it literally smells like instant potatoes, and it has a very different structure than the starch. So generally you're going to use potato starch, but sometimes some recipes, I've seen some flour blends that include the potato flour. The most common combination that I've seen out there is rice flour, tapioca starch, and potato starch. If you look at what's on the market, in general, they almost always have those three, depending upon which flour blend that you choose. And they may or may not contain xanthan gum or a type of gum or a binder. And that's important. And I'll explain why when we get to the binders. So one of the things that I feel like, and this is as I do more teaching, I'm really going to talk about is my little friend, the scale. So even though I'm going to give you the actual recipe in cups, when you start baking, if you really want your baking to be successful, you have to have a scale. This little scale costs, I think, about $10, maybe $12. I have two of them. That's how much I use them because we're always fighting over them. Best investment ever. And when one of the things Alan shared was I have an Amazon store, and if you would like to buy from there, I'm an affiliate. I get a little bit of a kickback. It's like this much, but still better than nothing. The other thing for baking that I really think you should have is an instant read thermometer. So I use this specifically for yeast, anything with yeast, to make sure the liquid is at the right temperature. So throughout our presentation, I'll tell you about some of the things that I think are must-haves, but right there, those two things changed how I changed the quality of my baking. And where to buy? So I buy my products from Amazon, Costco, Vitacost. These are all good outlets, and then sometimes directly from the actual producer or the actual company or purveyor. Okay, next slide. And if you want to see if there's any questions in the chat while I'm going through the binders, that may be good. Make sure I'm not going too, and if I'm going too fast or anything, just send a little message. Do you see that it's how it's highlighted? I can, at the top there, I can, all right, maybe not. All right, so the basics on the binder. So in general, when you talk about, if I put together a flour blend and it's rice and potato and tapioca, and you use that as is, it's not going to hold together because there's no gluten. So you need some type of binder. The only exception is if you're making something like a waffle or a pancake, or sometimes when you use recipes that have a lot of a gummy type, like a sweet rice flour, it's more sticky and it'll hold together. So you need something to kind of keep it together. So the most popular one is xanthan gum, and it has an N. I used to call it xanthan, but it's xanthan gum. And in general, what I use is, if I'm making my own blend, it's a half of a teaspoon for 2 cups of gluten-free flour. Now, if you're making things like bread or making things like certain cakes, you sometimes have to use more. And in my cookbook and in my recipes online, I always tell you specifically how much gum to add if you're using a mix, homemade mix. Guar gum, I used a little bit. I'm not as familiar with it, but I know it's a little bit more. So it's more of a teaspoon for every 2 cups of gluten-free flour, but I'm just not as familiar with it, but that is one out there. And one that has become more popular in the last few years, it looks funny, but it's called psyllium husk. So it's made from a plant. And when I look at the recipes or look at the flour blends that are made for bread, I see that it usually has that, or I've made gluten-free donuts or vegan donuts and it had psyllium husk, and different types of bread has psyllium husk. So if you can't tolerate the gums, that might be a good option as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here is my simple, what I call do-it-yourself gluten-free flour blend. Again, the ratio is 2 parts grain to 1 part starch. So for example, if you can't tolerate rice, you just want 2 parts of some grain. And if you can't tolerate maybe potato, you might double up on the tapioca and just make sure that it's, 2 to 1. So I do it in cups to make it easy, but if you could increase or decrease this recipe simply. So what I like to use is 4 cups of super fine rice flour. And I do find there's a difference between the super fine and just the white rice out of that you might see in the store. And within that 4 cups, I use 2 cups of brown and 2 cups of white. And then there's a little asterisk there on the screen. What I really use when I say 2 cups of white is I'll use white rice flour and sweet rice flour. And I just find that it just is, I just, sometimes I can't tell you like for the chemical or for the scientific way, it's just after doing it for a while, I find the results work really well. But at a minimum, I like to mix up my rice flours. And then I'll use a cup of tapioca starch and a cup of potato starch. So if you were to look at 4 to 2, it's the same as 2 to 1. So when I mix it, I'm actually, I might be making 1.5 times that recipe. And what I want to show you is how, what I have. So this is, I've had this, if you look at pictures from my cookbook from 10 years ago, I still have this. I got a Bed Bath & Beyond, which is so sad because they're going out of business, but I'll try to find a replacement. I keep, I have a little scoop in there. And then I found these on Amazon. I love these for, you can get a lot out of there. When I actually measure it out, I'll be honest, I don't use the scale. I just take a cup measure and I just throw it in there. When I measure my recipes, I'm using a scale or I'm being much more precise, but you can do it really fast. And it only requires taking out, say, 3 or 4 different flours at the time. But this particular recipe is the one that I was using up until I changed to another one. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this blend that I have here is what I use for pancakes, waffles, quick bread. Does everybody know what a quick bread is?
Yes.
Quick bread, yeah, okay, like a muffin or a banana bread or something like that. So something that's very sort of, I consider these simple. They're usually, the leavening agents, usually baking soda, baking powder, usually not using yeast. Super easy, doesn't need a lot of gum. This is great for that. Cookies, cakes works pretty well. You just have to make sure you have the right amount of gum, maybe a little bit more than the ones before. I use this to make pie crust, but I do add more gum. I've used it to make pasta, gluten-free fresh pasta. And I've also used it for flouring meat. So if you need to flour something, or maybe you're doing a breading station where it's flour, then egg and breadcrumbs, I use it for that, or for making a roux. Now, back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, I didn't think that you could use this type of flour for a roux. So I had recommended using cornstarch until somebody said, hey, I just use brown rice flour and butter and I make a roux and it works. And I was like, oh my gosh, that actually works. And I tend to use the one without gum because some of the ones on the market that have gum make them the gravy or the sauce super gummy. So this way it kind of replicates what happens with a regular flour for roux, but still gives you that thickness, and it does work really well. I tend to cook it a little bit longer than I would cook. And on the screen it says, or just SF white rice flour. That means super fine. So you don't have to, if you don't want to use this flour blend for those things, a super fine white rice flour, or even just white rice flour, which I have what I call here. Let me close up. This is what I have as my bench flour. And this, I just reuse containers and I wash them real well. So this is when I go to make scones or pizza, I keep this in my cabinet and I put it on my counter. So this is really handy. This, besides making your own, this is very nice to have as well. The other thing that you can have are containers like this, and you can make them this big. We'll talk about that a little later on. We'll talk about some of the flour blends that I use. Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Want to go over some of the questions that we have here?
Yeah, let's go. We have a couple of questions, and I've got a good pace. So yeah, let's.
So, question says about trying to make gluten-free bread without yeast is a problem. And
Okay,
then-
so let me do one at a time. So the first question is how to make gluten-free bread without yeast. I have done it with baking powder, I believe just baking powder. And hopefully you can have egg whites because egg whites will really help with the leavening. I don't have the recipe handy, but I know that there are recipes out there, so it is possible. I had one customer who asked me to create a no yeast bread recipe, and it's doable. It's just you need to somehow leaven that dough with something. So baking powder is really baking soda with a couple other ingredients added in. So at least a baking soda, and then sometimes adding fizzy water, so make it bubbles, and then it kind of gives it some air. That can help. Egg whites can help, things like that. And hopefully that answers the question. You can just, if you have additional questions, just put it into the chat. Okay, next.
So alternatives to gums. So other things other than xanthan or guar.
So besides the xanthan or guar, you can, the psyllium husk potentially. You could try maybe try a ground flaxseed or ground chia seed might help bind. It really depends on the recipe itself. And there are some mixes that are out there that are gum-free. And I think the one I'm going to show you is gum-free. So that's one of the reasons I use that as well. Okay.
So can I access this info after the presentation, or do I need to take screenshots?
No,
and
okay,
notes?
okay. Well, of course, if you want to make notes, take notes, you can, but I plan to send everyone, I have all your email addresses, and I plan to send you the PowerPoints, potentially a copy of the recording. I just have to watch it first and make sure I don't have to do any editing, and some recipes. You're going to get some recipes as well. So good question.
So Bed Bath & Beyond got bought by Overstock.
Oh.
They're merging and keeping the Bed Bath & Beyond name.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Bed Bath & Beyond got bought by Overstock. I was just thinking, I wonder if Overstock is going to take all those things. So maybe we can find this canister, because I've had this canister for 10 years and it's still ticking.
So what about arrowroot for a starch?
Oh, sorry, I forgot that one. Arrowroot could be potentially a starch. However, sometimes arrowroot, if you're using it for thickening, has a very gelatinous texture. So just be careful with that. And I did afterwards, I'm like, oh, and there were a few others. I did forget that. And I have it in my cabinet, so I do use it. Good one.
And then, is there a difference on using flour that is refrigerated?
Is there a difference between using flour that's refrigerated? Well, here in Half Moon Bay, because it hardly ever gets hot, I don't refrigerate my flour. However, I would recommend, if you're in an area where you do have to refrigerate your flour, is take it out and let it come to room temperature, or measure it and let it come to room temperature. When you're baking, you really have to make sure that everything is at the same time. Well, you should, because it just helps with, I mean, you don't have to, right? But it does help to make a better product if everything is at the same temperature. So you could keep it refrigerated. And another good thing is if you open it, to make a little note of when it's got open. My assistant's having a little snap over there. Make a little note of when it was open, so that you know how old it is. It's a typical thing we would do in the food service business, where you'd have a label, you open it and you put, 7, let's say 8.2, so you know how long it's been open. All right, I think that answers the question. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay,
Oh,
excellent.
no, maybe.
There might be another one.
I
Any
can't seem
experience
to,
working with cassava flour?
What's that?
Any experience
Yeah.
working with cassava?
Yeah, so the cassava flour question, I'm going to answer in the next, I'm not quite ready for it. In another slide, which I realized I didn't put it in there, but I've worked with it. And it sounded like somebody may have had another question. Did you?
I can't seem to send my question in. I don't know what I'm doing, but
Sure, it's okay. If you could just ask.
okay. First of all, I have your book from many years ago, and I took a class from you here in the Bay Area in 2014, and I have a lot of your notes. But on the superfine rice, why superfine instead of regular?
That's a great question. Why superfine instead of regular? If you were to compare them texturally, there's a big difference. And that texture, when in baking, makes a difference in how the texture of the baked good. It's less grainy. So it's not that you can't use it, it just comes out a little bit better when it's super fine. Because again, if you think about flour, regular flour, it's fluffy and smooth and it doesn't have any grit to it at all.
I have all the flours. I don't think I have the super fine. Is that more difficult to find?
No, I'm going to show you. This is one from Authentic Foods. They have one. Bob's makes one. I think there's one on Vitacost. You just have to look for it on the label. I have bought the Bob's white rice flour, and I was like, oh, it's not. I don't really like it for baking, so I use it more for like the bench flour or for cooking. It's just a preference for me. It's a preference, and because with my baking, I'm selling it, I want it to be like the best, but you could probably use it. If you notice that your baked goods taste gritty or not taste, but feel gritty, then I would switch to the superfine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The one last thing I want to talk about with the flour blend is that if you just take this flour blend that's not, sorry about that, talked about just right, like by itself, it really is not that good for bread or for pizza by itself. I tend to add things like sorghum or maybe millet. I find that just gives it a little more structure. So this is what I mean about there not being really a one-to-one, because when you're replicating a glutinous product, it needs different qualities. And I do find that with this, it just doesn't have enough structure, things like that. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the other flours, and I will talk about cassava, although it's not on there. I meant to put it in. All right, so here are some of the other flours that are out there. Sorghum, as I said, if you just look at it visually, it is a little bit darker than the other kind of more white flours, or the one that I have here. But it is really good for bread or anything that's heavier or denser, especially what I found is when I make bagels, I really like having sorghum in there. I think it just gives it more of a dense, chewier feel, as opposed to just using something that's all white. Millet is one I used to use when I talk about the old days. I mean, I started this back in, let's see, it's into 2007, and there was hardly anything out there. And a friend of mine gave me a recipe for a flour mix that had millet, which at the time, and it's even in the cookbook, worked really well. But as I progressed and as I learned more, I realized that it didn't have to be millet. Millet's good for recipes that need a little more structure. So really good for cornbread or maybe for muffins. But when it came to the cakes and the more delicate products, I think the potato rice tapioca only works the best. What else? And it can almost give it a nutty flavor, although it's not a nut. Millet is a grain, and it also can change the color, make it, it's yellow usually. Quinoa is another one that it's a little darker than the rice flours, and I find I use it. It's nice to use it in multigrain bread or something that you want to have a little bit darker. Buckwheat for the same reason, multigrain breads or crepes, and or galettes, I guess is technically a galette. And then teff flour uses, again, its uses are similar to buckwheat with the things you want a little bit more like a multigrain feel, and similar to buckwheat, and you also can make the spongy Ethiopian bread with that. Garbanzo, we have to be careful with because it is okay for some recipes, but bean flours tend to have a really weird flavor. So if you make something with a bean flour and then you taste the batter, you will probably throw it out because it tastes very strange. And sometimes it will taste that the product is up there after it's baked. I found cornbread is okay, and say falafels, but for the most part, I don't really like the garbanzo flour. So for example, with the Bob's, when they came out with their original all-purpose flour, it was bean-based, and it really had a funny, to me, it had a kind of a funny flavor. And then they eventually moved to this one-to-one baking flour, and that has some sorghum, so it's a little bit heavier, but it has the potato, the tapioca, and the rice. And then lastly, before you go, just it's not on here, but I forgot to talk about all of the paleo flour. So just briefly, let's go through them. Almond flour it's good for paleo baking, but you really can't use it as a substitute for rice. You have to have a recipe that calls for almond flour because it just is neither a grain or a starch. It's a nut, and it has more oil. It's fattier, so it works differently than your rice or your potatoes. So just if it's a almond flour recipe, great. But if you try to just substitute it, you might have a hard time. Coconut flour, the same thing. It absorbs a lot of moisture. So if you try to substitute that for a grain flour, you're going to have a very different outcome. So look for recipes that call for coconut flour, or you have to start experimenting. I just wouldn't do it right out of the gate, or add more liquid. And then lastly, cassava flour. So I use a brand called Otto's, and I really, really like it. So if any of the paleo or keto type baking, I think it works great. It's a different texture than your gluten-free, but if you're looking for grain-free, it's probably one of the best flours that I've used. Okay, so next slide, and then just let me know if there are any other questions. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the big reveal, if you don't know already, is I've been using, so everyone's like, oh my God, your gluten-free stuff is so good. Here is the secret. It is called the company is called Authentic Foods. So there's the bread flour. I use bread flour. I use the pizza crust. I'm giving you, this is this is what it's all about. And there's the cake flour. And those are their three main flours that they make. And I just find it works really well. So I buy 25-pound bags. It comes, luckily they're in LA, so it's not too far. And then I put them in these containers, and that's how I manage it. But I go through probably, I don't know, 50 pounds of each, maybe within a month or two. So for me, it's worth it to get that amount. I started, so here's the story. In 2019, I was ready to start I had been away for a little bit, and I was like getting over some stuff. And in 2019, I said, okay, I want to start baking again. And I had time on my hands. I was trying out different things. And I tried the Steves, and I was like, oh, that's really good. And then I started using a scale. I'm like, oh, look at that. It's coming out. And as I experimented, I realized how much better it was. And then 2019 became 2020, and all of a sudden I had a lot of time on my hands. So I started really experimenting with these three flour blends. And I am personally very picky about gluten-free food. I will eat almost anything, but I know that these three products, it made such a difference in what I was creating. So I pretty much switched to that. And once in a while, I use some of the other ones. So that is my preferred flour right now. I'm going to just show you. You're going to laugh. Don't laugh, but you could laugh. This is my big, I do once in a while use my Bob's. So if I could get in 25 pounds, I'm going to give it to my husband. So that's the Bob's 1-to-1. And the Bob's 1-to-1 will work for, I have used it for scones. I have used it for cookies. It's a good base flour, but it's not as good as Steve's. And a few things, it has sorghum, and it has quite a lot of gum, so it can be heavy. I don't really like it for cakes when I compare it to this. So that's, it's good in a pinch, but this is still better. What else have I tried? All right, King Arthur's. So this one did not have any gum, and I tried the gluten-free sandwich bread recipe on the back. It was also pretty expensive. I just went out and bought it. So I want to see what it's like. This, I think, was $10. It just was not worth it. And the bread that's on there, it was okay. It was not great, but it's not a bad blend. I just say it's all right. So again, in a pinch, you can use that. Better batter. Now, I had heard so much about better batter, and oh my gosh, no, wrong one. Sorry, that's the wrong one. All right, better batter. This is another one. Now, I tried this, and I made a baguette, and it was really good, but this bag, it was very expensive. So I think if you're just making it at home, it's definitely an alternative. But for me, the Steve's was much more economical. So I tried, what did I do? I made the artisan flour blend. I mean, the baguette's awesome, but I found I can replicate it with the Steve. So I use that. And then I use the regular flour for, what I made with it. Maybe for bread, something else. And I used it to make pie crust. And maybe I didn't follow something right or do something. It just didn't give me the results I wanted. Again, I compare it to what I'm using here. Okay, cup for cup. So this was the first upscale flour blend that came out. And I didn't use a lot because this one in particular uses milk. And personally, I try to be dairy free, so I don't use a lot of milk. But I said, I want to see what it's all about. So I bought this. I think it was $18, could have been $20 for the 3 pounds. Is it 3 pounds? Yeah, 3 pounds. 3 pounds. And I made muffins, and I put this on Instagram. Some people may have seen it. And I made muffins with the cup for cup and muffins with the Steve's cake. And the Steve's cake, this was very gummy, and it was okay, but again, it's okay. Oh, so half an hour. Okay, thank you. It was okay. I think that it's all relative, and if we're using something, or maybe you were using just a homemade flour blend or the old Bob's, or using the Bob's 1-to-1, it's probably better. But I think moving away from the gums is really the better bet. So that's just, again, just being honest. And then Vitacost sells flour, so they have a multi-flour blend, and then but they do have all the rice, the brown rice and such. Multi-flour blend is very similar to mine. Sometimes I use it just to save time, but it's okay. And then again, you want to check all of these products for what ingredients that they have to see if they have any leavening. So is there any baking soda, baking powder, anything like that? And if there's any gum, so if there's not gum, you may need to add it, and you may need to adjust recipes. So, and
Questions?
oh yes, okay.
So what about Namaste from Costco?
Oh, the Namaste blend, I used that kind of back in the day, and I haven't used that in a while. I don't remember exactly what's in there, but again, I found it to be okay. I'm just comparing it. I cannot even tell you what a big difference this flour has made. I used to make that Namaste had a spice cake, and I really like that. But my memory of it is that, because I believe this all has gum, my memory is that it is, you can kind of has that gummy texture. And the other thing I want to give kudos to with the Steve's blends is that when I made, what did I make? I made one of these. I think it was the cup for cup. Also, it didn't last quite as long. So these tend to be good for 2 or 3 days, where some of the other flour blends, the day after, the quality really goes downhill. So that's another thing that I really like. Okay, next, another question.
So used authentic food Steve's bread flour and found it absorbed much more liquid when making waffles, and it was non-usable. Any idea why?
Okay, so the question is about the bread flour, and it was used to make waffles, and it was unusable. So one of the things I will say, it's probably just didn't have enough liquid, but they have formulated each of these different flours of different recipes. I probably used the cake flour. I think it was just a matter of which flour. I generally use, I'm going to go through what I use them all for, but I probably wouldn't use bread flour for waffles. I'd use cake. I use this for fried donuts. It's really, really good. But otherwise, cake flour for almost anything sweet. So hopefully that answers the question. Next, anything else?
No.
And I feel like there was something else I was going to, oh, and if you wanted to make my flour blend, they do sell the small versions of these as well. The ones I have here are 3 pound bags, and they also all have recipes on the back. The bread so I usually start off with, if it's a recipe I don't know, I look on their website and I try to use what they've created, and I start with that, and then I make adjustments, because they're very, very good at knowing how to use their flour. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I think that was it. I think we're ready for the next.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So
Yes.
what were the 3 flours of the Steve's cake,
Yes,
bread,
okay.
and what else?
And pizza crust. I'm gonna talk about each of those in 2 slides.
Okay.
Yeah. If I had another hand, I would show you the other one, but yeah, pizza, bread, and cake. And they each have a different formula and they each have a different use. Okay, so what do you need if you want to start, say, for baking? What's important? So on Amazon, if you shop on Amazon, if you just want to see, you don't always have to buy everything on Amazon. There's and this link is in the chat at the very top if you're looking for it. I have my own store, so to speak, even though I'm not selling it per se. I'm recommending them, and I'm an Amazon affiliate, so really it's like this much of that. If it's cost $1, I'm getting that much. But I'm trying to look at it as, well, if I recommend the flour, or I'm sorry, whatever it is, the flour or the container or the scale, and it costs you $1 and it costs you $1, doesn't matter, and they pay for part of it, then that's how I can do some of these classes and maybe not charge as much, because it's a way to kind of defer those costs. So that is the website there. I think my assistant had to go and check on the dog, so I'm going to jump and switch. Oh, good. There we go. Okay, thank you. I'm back. So let's talk about what I use each of them for. So the cake flour. So this flour, and again, what I would say is you really want to follow the recipe. There is a recipe on the back for a vanilla cake. It's there. And all of the cakes I use from my bakery, this is what I started with. I did make some adjustments eventually, but this is kind of how I started. Now I do find, okay, here's interesting. This, I did talk to them at one point, and because of their how the flour is formulated, it is a little bit heavier than normal. So if your recipe, if you're just trying to swap out recipes, and it calls for 2 cups, and then what I would do is, so 2 cups is, but I think it's 145, is approximately 290 grams, because everything is in grams. Instead of using 2 cups, I might use 280 grams and start with a little bit less than what the recipe initially uses and see how that goes. So they even said it's not exactly a 1-to-1 because it does absorb a lot of liquid. Next one is the bread flour. So the bread flour, and this has a very basic bread flour recipe on the back. I use for bread, obviously. I make brioche pastry. I make bagels. I mean, I'm from New York, so I'm just going to tell you. And any of the bagels I find in the store, I call a roll with a hole, because all it tastes like is a roll that someone made and they stuck their finger in it and they did not boil it and bake it and do all the things you need to do. So the bagels that they make are, they have structure, they're chewy, they've been boiled and baked, they're super good. And then I also use the bread flour for yeasted donuts. So if you're trying to create like a Krispy Kreme or a jelly donut, the bread flour is the one. The pizza crust is here. And I'm obviously for pizza, but the difference is you can take this dough and you can actually roll it out. It's not like even the pizza crust that I have on my cookbook was very sticky, and it had to have oil or use it between parchment and such. And this, you can just roll out. It is excellent. So pizza, flatbread, garlic knots, if you miss garlic knots, calzones, breadsticks, it's awesome. So those are the basic, what I found I use the most, and I'm sure that there's others, but that's, yeah. Is there any questions right now before we move on?
Okay, so if we want to use just the blend, the flour blend that you suggested,
Mhm.
which is the brown rice, white rice, tapioca, and potato starch. And you
Yes.
said those are good for pancakes, waffles, quick breads, cookies, cakes, and pie crust. Now, do you have a blend that you use for pizza?
I have one in my cookbook, and I have not used it in 4 years because all I use is this, to be honest. So I don't think it's on the website. If you send me it's not only this, it has some sorghum in there, and I think it has some millet because it needs a little more structure. But if you send me an email, I will be happy to send you the recipe from the cookbook. But I will tell you that
I think
It's
I
just
have
not even
the,
close to- Yeah, okay.
I
Oh,
have the
okay,
Warm
got it.
Kitchen cookbook. So,
Yeah,
but
it's in
anyway,
there.
okay,
It's
thank
in there. No problem. Okay, any other questions? Do you want to check the chat?
Um,
Okay, and then we're gonna, I'm gonna talk about the next very exciting thing.
do you use yeast with pizza flour?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
And then where would focaccia bread fall in the yeast?
Oh, so where would the focaccia bread fall on these? I've used the pizza recipe, which is the pizza, let me see. So the pizza crust mix has a recipe, although I have added a couple things, and I'm going to talk about that when I talk about the recipes I'm going to give you. You would use this, and you can add things to it, but that works really well, or the bread flour, one or the other. I've only made focaccia a couple of times, but to make it simple, I've used the pizza flour and it works really well. The pizza, they call it pizza crust. Okay, anything else? Okay, so this is the next part that I'm very excited about, because I got in contact with the folks from Authentic Foods, and they said, listen, they said, your stuff is so good, but it definitely has a perception of being expensive. And I know it's good, but what can we do? Can we maybe do a discount? Can we get some more people to use it? So they have said they're gonna, if you buy now, the gluten-free-supermarket.com is their store from their website. And if you purchase these, this size, the 3-pound bags, any combination, and use the discount code AmyFamChef, just like that. And if you forget it, I'll send it to you. They're going to give a 20% discount. So
wow.
I just feel like the more people who have this, you will see the difference. And I'm going to eventually be teaching classes, and I'll probably mostly be using this because that's how good it is. And I tell it like it is. And if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd say, oh, is this flour because my flour, because that's all I knew. But as soon as I started using this, I'm like, oh, this is game changer. So, and I can tell because when I'm at these, I've been going to farmers markets for about 3 years now, and people come up to my booth, and sometimes they know it's gluten-free and sometimes they don't, but they'll say to me, they'll come back, oh my God, that's gone, or oh my God, the lemon, or oh my, it's so good. And then the people who know, even who aren't gluten-free, and they'll come back the next time and say, I know that you told me it's gluten-free, it's just so good. I just am so amazed. So I know that it's worthy of its cost. I don't even, and I use organic eggs, organic butter, sugar, because that all adds to the flavor. But once I get into more classes, we can talk about that. So let's talk about what's.
So
yes.
another question. So the question is, it's about the seeds. Is it organic and non-GMO?
Oh, okay. It is not organic, but I believe all of it is non-GMO. So so they manufacture it. So there's a little non-GMO. And I do like that as well. So I think that all of them all of them are non-GMO. So, and I can also tell you, to be honest, that during toward the end of the pandemic, because of supply chain issues, the prices have gone up, but I'm committed to using it because I really feel like the product, getting this type of product in people's hands is much more important. And when I compare the price of my bread, although it's expensive, I make a 2-pound loaf, which is about that. It's really big. And I compare that to what's in the grocery store, say the regular price, because I know everything goes on sale, it's all inflated. It's ounce for ounce, maybe just a little bit more, and about 20 times better. So I think that if you want to start doing baking at home, this is going to be much better than what you find in most stores. And it's going to be fresh. That's the other thing. Okay, so let's talk about what's next for me. So although I love baking, for all of you, it's me, myself, and I most of the time. I have a son who is in college and a daughter who is in her senior year, and I don't have as much help. So I'm really going to be moving towards taking all my recipes and content and making videos and making that available and doing some type of subscription process. I haven't quite figured it all out, but we're going to show you when we're done with this, we're going to go to a little sample video of what it might look like. And I kind of think of it as being like home bakers, and then I have what's called a cottage food license, cottage food, and even food service. So I feel like what would be best for the community is if I teach more people, there'll be more people to make more stuff for all of you, and including, it could be including yourself. So that's kind of where I'm going with my next phase. So the content will be online for baking. I'm also going to start doing cooking, so like the pastas and like just dishes that I think you can make at home that taste so much better than a restaurant. And it'll be a combination of recipes and videos. And I'll be teaching the classes. And because you have taken this class, anyone, and I have that information through Zoom, when I'm ready to publish the content, you will automatically get a discount, an offer, a discount to that content. So it won't be at the regular price. I'm still working on all that. I think my son's going to help me with that as well. So just make sure at amythefamilychef.com, there's a place to enter your email address for cooking classes. And that's what I'm going to be using for cooking classes.
So here's a little sample of what a cooking class might look like.
Hi, I'm Amy Fothergill. Today I'm going to show you how to make my pizza bread. It's one of my favorite recipes. Here I have some pizza dough that I made with the Steve's pizza crust flour, and I've had it in the fridge for a couple days, and that gives it a nice flavor. If you do make it ahead, make sure it is at room temperature. Another little tip, you can put some oregano in the dough itself if you want to give it that pizza flavor. And then we'll be frying it in the cast iron skillet. The approximate amount of dough that we want is between 75 grams and 80 grams. Another thing I like to use before I get too dirty is I'll take a little bowl and I'll take some of my olive oil. I love having my olive oil in something like this. I can pour it, just makes it a lot easier. And that way, if it's sticky, I can just put my fingers in this and then I'm gonna roll it. So if you it's almost as big as my palm, and I'm going to roll it, and then with the heel of my hand, I'm going to press out. And notice I'm pressing and pushing out rather than pushing the sides so that it doesn't get too flat. Little flatbreads to a party or make it for your friends. Whenever I've done it, people look at me and they're like, no, this cannot be gluten-free. It's so good. And I'm like, no, I promise it is. Of the sizes, it's about the size of my hand. You don't want them too big because otherwise they'll be too thick and then it might not cook all the way in the middle. So there we go. Let's go and get cooking.
Now we're going to look at some things I've made over the years. There's some donuts with lots of different glazes, my delicious cinnamon rolls made with the bread flour. Those are my baguettes. I've also made these delicious pastries made from brioche dough. I have made, this multi-grain bread people love. It's vegan, has all different types of grains in there. Those are the garlic knots. So if you miss those, there's another picture of the garlic knots. And this is one of my best cupcakes I ever created. It's a chocolate cupcake, vanilla frosting, and those are homemade little circus animal cookies that I replicated from, I think it was the Mother's Circus animal cookies that you used to buy in the store. I used to bring those to the farmer's market. Kids just love them. And it's on my banner, and you see it lots of different places. So that's our famous buttercream, and it's just one of those things that people really like. There's the fruit crisp. I always make that with in the summer with the local fruit whenever I can. Some vegan donuts we made before, chocolate. Those are chocolate cupcakes with gluten-free Oreos. And I just been doing lots of different things. Oh my gosh, these tarts with the fruit. So I had peaches and pears and things like that. And that was some bread. The bagels, one of my favorite things. I love my bagels. Those are actually paleo. It's a paleo almond joy donut. And there's the famous sandwich bread, which I love. It has eggs and butter and milk. It's really delicious. Lavender blueberry donuts. I think those were dairy-free when I made those. Those are paleo orange cakes, another fruit crisp, and the churros. So these are just some of the things I've been making over the last couple of years. A strawberry scone with some coffee, paleo brownies with peanut butter. I'm getting hungry. What about you guys? Pizza?
In conclusion, I'd say find a gluten-free flour that works for your baking needs. I have these three, and then I also sometimes use this one, and sometimes I use Bob's or use the paleo ones, depending on what I'm making. Make your own or buy it. Keep a few gluten-free flours on hand so you can always, make recipes. Experiment to find what works. So as I said, I've been doing this since 2007. That's a long time. So it's 16 years. And this is the first time I was blown away. And just, sign up for classes. That's part of your to-do list. If you would like more information, I mean, I have your email, but if you want to make sure that you're in on stuff and this, let's see if there are any other questions and then we'll wrap it up.